Between 1960 and 1971, 11 years produced more soul than the rest of the century combined. And most people only know the surface of what actually happened inside those recording studios. These weren't just hit records. These were dispatches from a movement. Cry-outs from artists who had everything to lose, and in some cases, everything taken from them the moment the record went to number one. Today on Rhythm Origins, we're counting down the 10 most played, most documented, most culture-shifting R&B songs from 1960 to 1971. And the song we're saving for number one was rejected twice, buried inside an album for over a year, and still became the biggest single in Motown history the moment the world finally heard it. Number 10. Save the Last Dance for Me, The Drifters. 1960. In 1960, two of that year's biggest R&B number ones also crossed over to top Billboard's all-genre Hot 100 chart. And Save the Last Dance for Me by The Drifters was one of them. But here's what makes this record more than a classic, and what most listeners never knew when they were slow dancing to it in their living rooms. The song was co-written by Doc Pomus, a man who lived most of his adult life in a wheelchair due to childhood polio, and who watched his wife dance at their own wedding reception from the sidelines because he could not physically join her on the floor.
I love you oh so much.
That moment of watching the woman he loved move with other men, knowing he couldn't follow her out there, is exactly what he put into those opening lyrics.
So darling, save the last dance.
The Drifters were one of the most fluid groups in all of soul history, cycling through lead vocalists across multiple lineups,
Don't give your heart to anyone.
while consistently producing chart-topping material. And Ben E. King had just departed the group when lead singer Rudy Lewis stepped to the front for this recording, filling a vacancy left by one of the most distinctive voices in R&B, with a performance smooth enough to carry the song to the absolute top of both major charts simultaneously. Save the Last Dance for Me became one of just two R&B singles in all of 1960 to simultaneously top both the R&B and Hot 100 charts. The emotional weight embedded in that lyric, a disabled man telling his wife she could dance with anyone in the room as long as she remembered to come back to him at the end of the night, never reached the radio audience explicitly, but it's in every single note of the arrangement, and once you know it, you will never unhear it. Number 9. Stand By Me, Ben E. King, 1961. The man who just left the Drifters didn't disappear. He walked right into one of the most enduring songs ever recorded, Ben E. King. King, fresh off his departure from the group, co-wrote Stand By Me in 1961. Drawing directly from a gospel standard called Lord Stand By Me, which itself traced back to a hymn composed by Charles Albert Tindley in the early 1900s. Meaning this song carries over a century of spiritual weight underneath a 2-minute R&B pop arrangement. What King and producer Jerry Leiber did in that studio was transform a devotional prayer into a love declaration without losing a single ounce of its gospel-rooted spiritual gravity, and the result was a record that felt sacred even when it was playing in a jukebox. The string arrangement, now iconic, wasn't part of the original demo King brought in. It was added in the studio during the session and transformed the bare-bones structure of the song into something that felt almost cinematic before the concept of a movie tie-in was ever attached to it. The song has charted on the Billboard Hot 100 across 4 separate decades, something virtually no other record from this era can claim, and when it was re-released in 1986, after being featured in the Rob Reiner film of the same name, it hit the top 5 all over again, proving the original 1961 recording had lost nothing, and that a song built from a 100-year-old hymn and recorded in a single afternoon had more staying power than entire careers. Number 8. Dancing in the Street, Martha and the Vandellas, 1964. In the summer of 1964, Marvin Gaye sat down and co-wrote what he initially imagined would be a straightforward summertime dance anthem for his label mates, Martha Reeves and the Vandellas. And what came out of that session was a record so loaded with double meaning that it got banned from radio in certain American cities during the civil rights movement, because station managers were convinced it was a coded signal to start uprisings in the streets. Martha Reeves herself spent years insisting in interviews that she had no political agenda whatsoever when she stepped to that microphone, that she simply believed she was recording a party song about dancing, and yet the timing of a record that shouted about action in the streets of Chicago, New Orleans, Philadelphia, Baltimore, and Washington, D.C. during the most racially charged summer America had seen in decades was too loaded for nervous radio programmers to ignore. The drum pattern that opens the song, written by Marvin Gaye and co-produced with William Mickey Stevenson, was a deliberate choice to make the groove so undeniable that it would force physical movement before a single lyric was even sung. And it worked. Because that opening percussion hit remains one of the most recognizable 4-second introductions in the entire Motown catalog. The record reached the top 5 on both the R&B and Hot 100 charts, became an international hit in the UK, and resurfaced again in 1985, when David Bowie and Mick Jagger recorded their own version for Live Aid, introducing a completely new generation to its energy. And the story of whether it was a dance song or a protest song is still being debated to this day. Number 7. Papa's Got a Brand New Bag, James Brown, 1965.
Like the boomerang. Hey!
James Brown recorded this song in one single live take during what was supposed to be a throwaway studio session in February 1965. Which means the track that would become one of the most important recordings in the history of American music was captured in a single continuous performance, without a single planned overdub or arranged retake. And James Brown himself reportedly didn't think it was finished enough to release. He was wrong. What Brown and his band did in that session was essentially invent a new rhythmic language, shifting the musical emphasis from the 2 and 4 beats that had defined R&B for a generation onto the 1 beat, the downbeat, creating the rhythmic foundation that would eventually become the entire genre of funk and the backbone of almost every major dance music form that followed, from disco straight through to hip-hop. The song was first released as a 2-part single on King Records because the full live take ran too long for a standard radio format, and even in its edited form it hit number 1 on the R&B chart and crossed over to the top 5 on the Hot 100. earning Brown his first Grammy Award for Best Rhythm and Blues Recording in 1966. The rough, live-room sound quality that Brown was initially embarrassed by turned out to be exactly what made the record feel different from everything else on the radio that year. Because it sounded like something that was happening in real time, rather than something assembled in a studio. And every musicologist who has written about this song since 1965 points to that one-take session as the precise moment modern popular music changed its rhythmic foundation permanently. Number 6. A Change Is Gonna Come, Sam Cooke, 1964. Sam Cooke wrote this song after being turned away from a whites-only motel in Shreveport, Louisiana, in October 1963. And then reportedly finishing the melody after listening to Bob Dylan's Blowin' in the Wind and asking himself why a young white folk singer seemed more willing to directly address the American racial crisis than any black artist he knew, including himself.
A long time coming, but I know.
The result was a recording so raw, so overtly political, and so personally confessional that even Cooke himself was afraid to perform it live, worried that the song's directness would make him a target and shorten his commercial reach at the exact moment he was crossing over to mainstream audiences. The orchestral arrangement, built by arranger Renee Hall around a wall of strings, French horns, and a rhythm section that swells like a gospel congregation, building toward testimony, was Cooke's deliberate attempt to make this political statement feel as monumental and undeniable as it sounded inside his head.
Then I go.
RCA Records initially kept the song buried as the B-side of Shake, afraid of the commercial risk of leading with a civil rights anthem, but the song refused to stay hidden.
Help me, please.
Eventually reaching number 9 on the Hot 100 and number 2 on the R&B chart after Cooke's shocking murder in December 1964, made every word of its lyric about survival and longing for justice feel like prophecy.
Hang around. It's been a long
Cooke was only 33 years old when he was shot and killed at a Los Angeles motel, just weeks after finishing the song.
downtown.
And the circumstances of his death have been disputed and re-examined by music historians for over 6 decades.
Now I think I'm able to.
Leaving behind a record that still sounds to this day like it was written for a moment that hasn't finished arriving yet. Number 5. When a Man Loves a Woman, Percy Sledge, 1966. Percy Sledge recorded this song in Muscle Shoals, Alabama, after a girlfriend walked out on him, and he was so wrecked by the breakup that he converted a song he had been performing with his band in a loose, informal version into a full studio recording in one emotional session that he later said he barely remembered making because of how consumed he was by the pain of what had just happened to him. The song was tracked at Fame Studios in Sheffield, Alabama, with a group of session musicians who were already developing the Muscle Shoals sound that would eventually attract Aretha Franklin, the Rolling Stones, and Wilson Pickett to that small Alabama town to record. And the organ introduction that opens, "When a Man Loves a Woman," was actually a mistake by organist Spooner Oldham that stayed in the final mix, because the accident was more emotionally devastating than anything planned could have been. The record hit number 1 on both the R&B and Hot 100 charts simultaneously in May 1966, making Percy Sledge, a nurse and part-time performer who had never released a commercial record before this moment, an overnight international star before he had even fully processed what had happened to the relationship that inspired the song. It also became the first soul record to be a massive hit in the American South, across both black and white radio formats simultaneously. A breakthrough that surprised even the label executives at Atlantic Records who distributed it, because the racial politics of Southern radio in 1966 made that kind of crossover genuinely rare, genuinely unpredicted, and genuinely historic. Number 4. My Girl, The Temptations, 1964. Smokey Robinson wrote this song specifically for David Ruffin, who had just joined the Temptations as their new lead singer and needed a showcase record that would prove his voice could carry an entire group's commercial identity on its own. And Robinson later said in interviews that he wrote it in about 20 minutes after hearing how Ruffin sang and understanding immediately what kind of melody would unlock everything that voice was capable of doing. The opening guitar riff, played by Robert White, is statistically one of the most recognizable 2-second introductions in American pop history. Identifiable to an overwhelming majority of listeners before the first word is ever sung, and it arrived on that recording almost fully formed in a single studio pass. The song was the first #1 pop single the Temptations ever had, ending their run as primarily an R&B act and opening the door to a crossover commercial dominance that would define the rest of the decade for them. And for Motown as a whole. And Berry Gordy reportedly saw this record as the precise moment his label shifted from a regional R&B operation to a mainstream American pop powerhouse. Robinson has spoken in interviews about how he wrote My Girl as a direct answer to a song he had written earlier for Mary Wells called My Guy. Essentially building a companion piece for the male point of view that mirrored the structure and emotional tone of the Wells record note for note. Which is why the two songs feel like they exist in the same emotional universe, even though they were recorded by completely different artists on completely different days. Number 3. In the Midnight Hour, Wilson Pickett, 1965. Wilson Pickett arrived at Fame Studios in Muscle Shoals, Alabama, in May 1965, with almost nothing, just an idea for a chord progression and a title, and spent 2 days in that studio with guitarist Steve Cropper, working out the rest of a song that would become one of the most played records in the entire history of Southern soul. And the track that essentially announced to the world that a new, harder, rawer version of R&B had just arrived, and it wasn't apologizing for anything. Atlantic Records producer Jerry Wexler took the gamble of driving Pickett to Muscle Shoals to record with an integrated band in Alabama during the Civil Rights era. A decision that was logistically complicated and politically loaded, because the South was still violently enforcing segregation, and driving a black artist into that environment to record with white session musicians was not a neutral act. What came out of that tension was a performance of pure adrenaline. Pickett's voice doesn't ask you to feel something, it grabs you and demands it, and the guitar and rhythm section underneath him sound like people who understand that something important is being documented in that room, and they cannot afford to play it safe. Steve Cropper, who co-wrote the song with Pickett during those 2 days, has said in interviews that Pickett demonstrated what he wanted the beat to feel like by doing a slow, deliberate dance step in the middle of the studio floor, and Cropper and the band translated that physical movement directly into the drum and guitar pattern that became the groove. Meaning the heartbeat of one of soul music's greatest records was literally choreographed by the artist's own body before a single note was tracked. Number 2, Respect, Aretha Franklin, 1967. The original version of Respect was recorded by Otis Redding in 1965, and was essentially a man telling a woman that all he wanted when he came home was a little basic acknowledgement for going out and providing. A fairly conventional soul message for the era, and it was a solid regional hit with no indication whatsoever of what Aretha Franklin was about to do to it 2 years later. Franklin completely rearranged the song, added a supercharged interlude, featuring the emphatic spelling out of the song's title, and flipped the entire gender dynamic, transforming what had been a fairly passive domestic request from a man into an absolute, non-negotiable demand from a woman who was not asking anymore. With her sisters Irma and Carolyn flanking her in the studio to deliver the call and response that made RESPECT one of the most immediately recognizable moments in the history of recorded music. The song won Franklin her first 2 Grammy Awards and reached #1 on both the R&B and pop charts simultaneously, while at the same time becoming a rallying point for both the civil rights and women's liberation movements, without Aretha ever explicitly claiming either affiliation in an interview. Otis Redding himself heard the finished Aretha version and reportedly told friends and collaborators that she had completely taken his song away from him and he would never be able to get it back. A statement he meant as a sincere, stunned compliment rather than a complaint, because he recognized that what she had done to it was simply better than what he had imagined it could ever be. Franklin had traveled to Muscle Shoals to record at Fame Studios in January 1967, but only spent 1 day there before an altercation broke out and the sessions were abandoned. Meaning, Respect, the song that became her defining cultural statement, was completed in New York under pressure, grief, and circumstance, and still arrived sounding like the most confident record ever made. #1, I Heard It Through the Grapevine, Marvin Gaye, 1968. And here is where everything in this countdown has been leading, because this is the song that was rejected not once, not twice, but multiple times by the same record label, sat buried inside an album for over a year, and still became the biggest single in Motown history the moment the world was finally allowed to hear it. Producer Norman Whitfield recorded I Heard It Through the Grapevine with various Motown artists, with the first known recording being with The Miracles on August 6, 1966. Though their version was not released as a single due to Berry Gordy's veto during Motown's weekly quality control meetings, with Gordy advising Whitfield and Strong to create a stronger single. So Whitfield went back to the studio and recorded it again, this time with Marvin Gaye in early 1967. And Gordy rejected that version too, burying it in the vault while he pushed different Gaye singles to radio instead. Angry with the rejection, Whitfield turned to Gladys Knight and the Pips with great success. Their up-tempo rendition, infused with Gladys's invigorating gospel soul delivery, charted in October 1967, going to #1 on the R&B chart and #2 on the Hot 100, soon becoming the biggest-selling Motown single up to that time. That should have been the end of the Grapevine story, but Whitfield was still not finished, because the version Gaye had cut was still sitting in the vault, and when Gaye's 1968 album In the Groove was released, radio disc jockeys found the track buried on side 2 and started playing it without being asked to, without a single, without promotional support, purely because the recording was too undeniable to ignore. Berry Gordy finally agreed to release the Gaye version as a single in October 1968, and it went to the top of the Billboard Pop Singles chart for 7 weeks, from December 14, 1968, to January 25, 1969, also holding #1 on the R&B chart during the same 7 weeks. Guy's recording eventually outsold the Pips' version, and, until the Jackson 5's I'll Be There, some 20 months later, was the biggest hit single of all time on the Motown label, moving over 4 million copies by 1969. The label was pleased with the success, although Gaye, depressed because of the illness of his singing partner Tammy Terrell, who would die less than a year later, was quoted as saying that his success didn't seem real and that he didn't deserve it. Think about that reality for a moment. A man had just recorded the biggest single in Motown history, a record sitting at #1 for 7 straight weeks across both major American charts. And he was so consumed by grief over his partner's declining health that he couldn't feel any of it. The phrase, "heard it through the grapevine" itself carries deep historical significance. Originally associated with the informal communication network used by enslaved African Americans, And Grapevine is the only song to hit #1 on the Billboard R&B chart 3 times across 3 different artists in 3 separate years, while the recording was later inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame for historical, artistic, and significant value, because a song that was rejected twice, buried in a vault, and released only because radio DJs forced the hand of the most powerful man in black music history had simply earned that kind of permanence.